Welcome to today's Ethnic Media Services Zoom news conference, co-sponsored by the Blue Shield of California Foundation. I'm Sunita Surabji, EMS's health editor and co-director with Pilar Marrero of these Friday news briefings. Domestic violence is the oldest and most pervasive form of violence in the world, says author, essayist, and activist Angela Davis. It's long been accepted as just an inevitable part of the complex fabric of family relationships across all cultures, including mainstream American culture. Today, a growing movement to break that mindset is emerging, even as data reveal that the rate of domestic violence has not fallen. 1 out of 3 women and 1 in 6 men in the US have experienced domestic violence at some point in their lifetimes. The most dramatic indicator of progress, however, says Davis, is that when she was growing up, there was silence about this issue based on the assumption that nothing could be done. 50 years later, there's a public commitment to end domestic or gender-based violence for good. That, she suggests, represents a sea change. Speakers today will focus on efforts to find solutions through legislation, reforms in the judicial system, and grassroots mobilizing through social media by survivors of abuse themselves. Our speakers include video remarks by Angela Davis, who is a distinguished Professor Emeritus at UC Santa Cruz. She's an author and, of course, a veteran activist. California State Senator Susan Rubio, a Democrat from Baldwin Park. Tina Swithin, the founder of One Woman's Battle, and Vijay Sundaram, a reporter for the San Francisco Public Press, and the co-founder of Narika, a nonprofit advocacy group working with South Asian American women. We ask speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean, and we ask reporters to enter their questions in the chat box, which we will address following each speaker as time allows. Our speakers are also encouraged to answer questions in the chat throughout the conference. We will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information for each speaker to all participants later on today. So now we begin today with a short video excerpt of remarks made by Angela Davis, who delivered last week at a conference on domestic violence sponsored by Blue Shield California Foundation and the Black Freedom Fund. Jessica, may I please ask you to run Angela Davis's remarks? Thank you.
When I first became aware of domestic violence, gender violence, as a political issue in the 1970s, with the speak outs and all of the kind of feminist formations that were occurring at that time, the first question that was tackled was the question of silence. How we're talking about a form of violence that has been in most human societies for hundreds of years. And we also learn how to hide it, because somehow it's represented as the problem of the survivor. I wrote a book some years ago called Blues Legacies and Black Feminism. And one of the reasons I wrote that book was because in listening to Black women blues singers, Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, and so forth, Ida Cox, Rosa Henderson, and so forth, I noticed that many of them sang about violence. They sang about what was happening to them in their relationships. I wanted us to have a sense of how long it often takes for these ideas to make a difference. And of course, we want to see immediate change. There's gathered here today discussing an issue which first became a part of public discourse over 50 years ago. And as a matter of fact, this is the most widespread pandemic form of violence in the world. And with all of the actions that have happened, with all of the domestic violence centers and rape crisis centers and so forth, the actual incidence of violence has not changed very much. So when I think back to my own childhood and the lack of a capacity to understand that, something needed to be done and something could be done. I mean, I'm, very fortunate in my family, immediate family. We did not have direct experiences, but I can remember many stories, friends and relatives, and I can remember at that time just feeling absolutely incapable of doing anything, because the discourse, the available discourse, was that this was just a natural phenomenon. This was just something that existed, and nothing could really be done about it except to find solutions involving escape, but not changing the frame, not challenging whether violence was necessarily a part of human relationships. And when I compare that period to today, we have made a progress that would have been unimaginable, that I don't know whether I've ever experienced a moment when vast numbers of people were so politically engaged, when vast numbers of people were so concerned about the future of our planet, concerned about the climate, concerned about war, concerned about ending racism. And so that's very different from, this is a period unlike any other in the history of this country. We're making progress. I feel very hopeful. Well,
That was so powerful. Many thanks to the Blue Shield Foundation of California and the Black Freedom Fund for making Ms. Davis's remarks available to us. We now move on to California State Senator Susan Rubio, who has authored a number of bills addressing domestic violence, including the HELP Act. Senator Rubio, welcome. Senator Rubio?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. Will you begin?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. Anyone that knows my work knows that I focus a great deal of my time and energy and policies on domestic violence issues, in particular because I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And since I started in 2018, I've made it my mission, one step at a time. The legislature moves very slowly. However, we have a good group of people that believe in keeping families safe. And I see some of my allies on this Zoom call. One of the bills that I did help pass was SB 914, which is the HELP Act. And that bill was primarily focused on tackling domestic violence victims that end up on the streets because of their circumstance. But often they're overlooked, they're not given the resources that they need. And so when we think of a victim with children, they're having to make a choice whether they leave the relationship and end up on the street homeless with their children, or stay in that relationship and be abused and battered. So that wasn't a real choice. And many victims, some that I spoke with, shared that they understand that when they go to shelters, they only allow them to stay 30 to 45 days, and then they're out on the street again. So for them, thinking long term, they really have to take it in and say, do I want to be homeless, or do I want to stay in this abusive relationship? There is no middle ground or a solution. So with the HELP Act, now we are requiring that we call them unaccompanied women. These are women who leave a relationship and end up on the street, but they don't get priority. For example, sometimes if there's families out on the street with children, they get taken in before someone that's single. Some reported up to being on the street up to 10 years before they got helped. And that is just unacceptable. I think everyone has the right to be housed and feel safe. And so now any continuum of care that receives state funding is required to have a gender equity lens, if you will. We want them to specifically be able to create policy and gather data that really focuses on domestic violence victims and this vulnerable population, and have clear outline goals. We want to see goals set and be measured and tracked to make sure that we're being successful with this policy. Besides this bill, I have about 25 bills that I've authored in this space, but another bill that I'm focusing right now, in 2019, when I started, I passed the Phoenix Act, which extended the statute of limitations for victims of domestic violence. It had not been touched in 30 years. So victims had 3 years to come forward and seek justice or get help. And many victims go up to 8, 9, 10 years with post-traumatic stress. They're not able to help themselves because of the trauma that they endured. And for the state to mandate that they come forward in 3 years was unacceptable. So I set out to change that and make it 15 years. Unfortunately, they reduced it, meaning they, through the committee hearings, we finally passed it with 5 years. So we gave victims 2 more years to get support. This year I had the bill that would extend it to 15 years. It did not die. It passed every single committee, but it was held in appropriations till January. So hopefully we'll get that done as well. And there's so many other policies, but I know that time is limited. So I'll turn it over to you if you have any questions. I see Tina on this call recently, about 15 days ago, the governor signed Peaky's Law, which is very important to a lot of mothers, and I believe she will probably speak on it. But this is also taking into consideration that judges sometimes are uninformed. Perhaps they don't have the experience that it's required to really make an informed decision. Peaky's Law is named after a 5-year-old little boy who was murdered by his father. During separation, of course, he was angry and he wanted to get back at his mom, which is Anastavis, and suffocated the little boy. The mother tried to no avail to try and get full custody of this child who was verbalizing that he was scared, he was being abused, and no one would listen. Sure enough, he ended up being suffocated by that parent. The judge that ruled in that case had spent 30 years in corporate law. He had just been appointed to family law, didn't really understand what the signs were, what are the patterns of abuse, even reading those perpetrators that sometimes the signs are obvious, but you need to know how to read them. So Peaky's Law will now help educate judges to ensure that they're studying domestic violence cases and child custody cases. Again, it's about just giving them the tools to make sure that they're making better decisions. So thank you so much for this time, and I'll turn it over to you if you have any questions.
Yeah, I see a number of questions coming through, but Senator Rubio, I wanted to ask you, first of all, you said at the top of the call that you came to this from your own personal experience, and I wonder if you could please share a bit of uh, your own personal experience that makes you an advocate for domestic violence?
Yes. Well, first of all, the misconception is, as I had that misconception, so I will be the first to admit that we tend to think that domestic violence happens to women or men. We know it happens to men as well. We tend to think that those that have higher degrees, perhaps are educated, have experience with the system, will not fall victims to domestic violence. I was a local council member. I have a bachelor's, a master's. I was a teacher. Everything that you would need to recognize the signs, to perhaps prevent yourself from falling victim to domestic violence, but it happened to me. So what I learned through my experience is that there are no barriers. It can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. But now, as I'm interviewing women, which I do all the time, I'm finding more and more that it seems like it's happening to a lot of professional women, because perpetrators know how important their reputation is, know how important the career is. So they spend a lot of time threatening the victims, either going to the media, going public with it. What happened to me was that I also suppressed it. I didn't want to share because I was a local elected official. I knew that the story would be all over the newspaper, which it did. The LA Times followed my case and was reporting on things that are extremely embarrassing for a victim. You're already a victim, and now you deal with the public scrutiny. I still hear things like, it didn't happen. Why didn't she leave? But that's common. And what we want to do is change that narrative. It is not up to any of us to decide when a victim should leave. That is why I wanted to extend the statute of limitations. There are at least 5 mothers that I know who left the situation under the 5 years that we're requiring them to come forward, and their children ended up murdered. So when victims are dealing with the circumstance, they need to make sure they're safe. They need to make sure their children are safe, and they need to make sure they have the support system to be able to walk away in a safe manner. We do know that statistically, the danger of being harmed or murdered happens after separation. And so for me, it was the fear of going public, the fear of everyone knowing. I did not want to my parents. I never told my family. So we're dealing with a lot of issues that we're having to contend with. So it's not an easy thing. So after my case and my story broke, hundreds of women reached out to me through social media, email. I became somewhat of a diary for all these women. And I knew there was a calling. I knew that I was placed in this position to do something about it. And through their experience and some of my own experience, I've been able to tackle issues one by one as the years progress. And so I've already authored or been partners with about 25 bills in the legislature.
Thank you. We have a number of questions. The first from Henrietta Burrows. Henrietta, would you please ask your question?
Yes, thanks so much, Sunita. You have basically answered my question, why it might take a victim 15 years to come forward. So I would like to ask you now, what about the perpetrators? Are they being convicted? Are they being sentenced? What's going on with their being brought to justice?
Well, the reason this was very important to me is, I'm going to share one particular case. What happened with one particular victim, she was not necessarily hit physically, and I'll share my domestic violence course of control bill and why I passed it. It was based on this particular woman who was not physically being harmed, but her perpetrator tied her up for 4 days, was depriving her of food and sleep, and really she was delirious after 4 days or so. And she ended up having post-traumatic stress for so many years that she didn't come forward. She came forward after she knew that other victims were being already abused. And I say this because this woman had audio, video, text messages, everything you'd want to convict a perpetrator. And because the statute of limitation had expired after 3 years, she was no longer able to seek justice. And the evidence was very clear. And this woman had was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. That's why I wanted to change it to 15 years to give victims that time. When you ask me about perpetrators, the reality is that most victims run into these barriers. They're not able to report on time. Trying to gather the information when you're a victim, the evidence when you're a victim is very difficult. Even as they acquire evidence, they run into the possibility of the perpetrator finding out and harming them even more. So they are being brought to justice. It depends on the circumstance, but a lot of victims are missing the mark, meaning they're not coming forward with enough time. And that is why it's so important that we passed the bill that was held this year. It would change the law from 5 years to 15 years. And hopefully we do hold these perpetrators accountable.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Our next question comes from Pilar Marrero. Pilar.
Okay, I wasn't able to mute before. Thank you so much, Senator. I can't tell you how personally I feel this, because there's no woman friend that I ask or talk with about this that doesn't have not one, but many stories. You know, I grew up in Latin America. I don't know how the experience is here, but growing up in Latin America, I saw everything I had to see on the street. I had everything touched that I had to be touched on the street. And a lot of women experience plenty of sexual violence growing up, both physical and psychological. When I arrived in the States, I was sexually harassed in a job. I mean, it's nonstop. It goes on and on. What is it that we need to do? And I don't think that's in the past. I think it's happening nowadays. This is beyond domestic violence. It happens everywhere to women, mostly to women. What is needed in this society in order to attack this larger problem that leads to women being so vulnerable everywhere they are to this kind of toxicity and poison?
Well, I think it boils down to education. A lot of victims don't know that there's help. What I hear a lot is immigrant women being threatened with their status, immigration status. And so if we have information to hand to them, that's why these forums are very critical to get the information out. Victims that perhaps don't have proper documentation don't know that if they come forward, there is help and that they will be protective. There are U visas where if you're a victim of domestic violence, you can stay in this country and be protected. So it's lack of information, because we are changing laws little by little, but victims still don't know. So I passed SB 1141, which changed the definition of domestic violence to include coercive control. As I shared that story about the victim that was tied up, she really couldn't say that she was assaulted, but the psychological torture and trauma this woman endured caused her to have post-traumatic stress for 8 years, but yet it wasn't recognized in the courts. So my SB 1141 now allows victims to use coercive control as supporting evidence in court. So if someone was withholding basic necessities like food, shelter, these needs that you need to survive, or finances, taking your check away every week, or taking your phone away, reading your text messages, all of this in accumulation is now they're able to take it to court and use it as supporting evidence. So when you ask me, what do we need to do, is make sure that victims know what's out there, because we are doing a lot of work. Now, it's not enough. The work will continue, and this is an ongoing battle, and it'll continue for many years to come. But if we can at least share with some of the victims what's out there, I think that they would feel more confident to come forward. And I also believe we have to tackle the issue on the other side, which is generational trauma. Perpetrators are abusing victims because they probably were victims of abuse themselves in the home or outside the home. But if we tackle that generational trauma, that's one way to help, but it has to start from when they're young. And so talking to our children, our young ones, about what domestic violence is, it's really helpful. I do that often in schools. I've been a teacher for 20 years. One of the first bills I passed was adding the hotline, the domestic violence hotline, in the back of ID cards, because I understood that perhaps children are experiencing violence in the home and they don't have anyone to call. So from 7th grade to higher education, if they turn the ID card around, they have a number they could call and get help, or at least have some questions answered. So again, education, little by little, making sure the victims know what's out there.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. Do you have time?
Probably one more.
Okay, so let me ask Renee Barbie to ask her question. Renee.
So on. And
Renee, are you still there? All right, then Mira Kaimal, will you please ask your question?
You did.
Okay, I will ask Mira's question for her. How can we encourage immigrant women to file a police complaint? Is that the first step to getting help? Many immigrant women who are abused are afraid that they won't be taken seriously by community members or faith leaders, people they turn to. That's an excellent question. Could you please address that, Senator Rubio?
Well, going to the police can be a very intimidating undertaking. I know it personally, it is a scary thing to call the police, and especially if you're in a dangerous situation. So I think for these immigrant women, I would recommend to go to a domestic violence advocate, domestic violence shelter, just to seek guidance, because you need someone at your side guiding you through the process, making sure that they help you navigate the legal system. I've been through the legal system. There's so many challenges and so many barriers, even to someone as, highly, I would say, considering I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, should have been something that I could have navigated so easily. But there's so many roadblocks, and not just because, someone's status or education. It's just the way the court system is set up. There's so many roadblocks. So they need to go to a shelter, to an advocate, a trusted friend. They just need someone by their side to help them navigate this. It's a scary thing to go through by themselves, especially undocumented. And what I fear is that, again, if they're doing it alone, there's danger of their perpetrators finding out and harming them. So I would encourage them to seek help with the shelter.
Absolutely. Final question, I promise. You said at the top of your remarks that, the Los Angeles Times covered your case and handled it pretty poorly, exposing elements of your story that should not have been out there. We are all reporters here. And I wonder if you could leave us by answering the question of how we report on domestic violence issues in a manner that is fair to the victim.
Well, one of the things I would add, when my abuser was sharing that the bruises came from me harming myself, I think it's just reading between the lines. We had plenty of evidence, photographs, witness testimony. By way of example, the police did go to my house, and we had the chief testifying, but of course, trying to put blame on me, he stated that I was harming myself, that I was crazy, that I was banging my head on the steering wheel. That's how I got the bruises. And that was reported. So, as a victim, I would say that particular statement was so harmful, saying, I won't say his name, but the person stated that she's crazy and that she was banging herself on the steering wheel. I think that printing that just sort of perpetuated what he was saying. He was saying I was crazy, and by printing that just added fuel to the fire of some of the harm that was done to me in terms of other people not believing me. You're in a very vulnerable state, so I think I would just say be careful what you print. If there's a victim, in this case I was the victim seeking justice, we don't want to give voice to that perpetrator that's trying to diminish your credibility, trying to make you out to look crazy. I know it's very sensitive, and as a media, you have to find that middle ground. But reporting what's happening was fair play, day by day. But saying that I was crazy and that he reported that I was banging myself in the steering wheel was the most humiliating and embarrassing thing I had to endure during that trial. So during my case. I'm sorry, it wasn't a trial, but being sensitive to the victim and being careful not to give voice to the perpetrator trying to embarrass the victim.
Senator Rubio, thank you so much for joining us today. We very much welcome your remarks.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I have to excuse myself, and have a wonderful day today.
All right. We move on now to Tina Swithin, founder of One Mom's Battle, who will share her story and how she utilized social media and a grassroots campaign to bring about change. Welcome, Tina.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. It is truly an honor to be here today. I am here as a survivor of both domestic violence and post-separation abuse, but I'm also here as an advocate dedicated to raising awareness on the crisis in the family court system. So I will share my personal story of how I protected my children while acting as my own attorney. My case started in August of 2009 as a victim of severe financial abuse. I could not afford an attorney. A lot of people have asked me, why didn't you hire an attorney? As if that was an option for me. It was not. I typed my first court declarations from a women's shelter where I had fled early one morning, afraid for my life. And I was successful in securing a restraining order, which granted me exclusive use of our home. But within 24 hours of leaving the shelter and returning home, he violated the order and entered the house. There were no repercussions for his violation, and I learned that I could not depend on law enforcement or the family court system to protect me. I truly do believe on the day I received my family court case number, I was also assigned my own personal terrorist. That is truly how it felt. There was a long period of time that I slept with a hammer under my pillow because I was afraid for my life. And I endured countless hearings, 2 separate trials. We were in court a total of 13 times just in 1 year alone. There were numerous CPS investigations which labeled my ex-husband as a moderate risk, but allowed my children to go back each and every weekend. Minors Council failed my daughters repeatedly. There were over a dozen interactions with law enforcement because I was utilizing all of the resources that I believed were available to me. There was a custody evaluation during the first year, but it prioritized my ex-husband's parental rights over my daughter's safety. And I saw a huge shift at year 2. Driven by sheer desperation, I spent an afternoon sitting in the courtroom. My case wasn't up to be called that day. I just didn't know what else to do, and I wanted to understand the system. And I remember the judge saying to me that day, out loud to everyone, "Swithin, you aren't on calendar. Why are you here?" And my response was, "Your Honor, I am just here to observe." That day, I will say it was life-changing. I saw things through a different lens. To the court, to the professionals, these were just business transactions and case numbers. But for me, these were my babies. And they were really little at the time, 2 and 4 years old. Nature intended for me to protect my children, and I was operating on common sense and emotion because of the nature of this topic. But both of those things are foreign and unwelcomed in the family court system. So for me, that experience of observing, it was really a time for radical acceptance and understanding the importance of strategy. So I started going to the courthouse as an observer whenever I had extra time. I started following cases that resembled mine. I would go to the computer at the courthouse and pull up various custody cases reviewing each and every declaration, document, filing. I paid attention to case law that was referenced, or phrases or terminologies being used by attorneys. And I really became a fixture at the courthouse. It was in 2012, I asked for and received a second child custody evaluation, same agency that had conducted the first one 2 years prior, but a different evaluator. And that evaluation is what ultimately protected my kids. That evaluator investigated and validated everything I had been saying since day one. But here's the problem. Family court is the wild, wild west. You can place the same case in front of 5 different professionals or 5 different judges, and you will have 5 different outcomes. This has to change. There is no regulation, no consistency, no oversight, no accountability, but these are children's lives, and these children are the future. It is common sense to err on the side of caution when child safety is in question, but that's not what's happening in family court. And it was during our final custody hearing, the judge called my ex-husband a sociopath twice and prohibited him from any further contact with the girls. But it took 6 years for them to understand and recognize how abusive he was. That is a third of my daughter's childhood. 6 solid years of abuse and trauma that we will be unpacking for a lifetime. My story was consistent from day one. It shouldn't be this difficult to protect kids. And by all accounts, I am considered one of the lucky ones. My children are safe and they are alive. But for anyone to hear my story and label me as lucky truly does shed light on the horrors of the system. I know I am lucky. I have incredible privilege just based on my skin color alone. And the fact that these court proceedings were in my native language. The extra challenges faced by those in marginalized communities needs to be highlighted and amplified. So once my daughters were safe, I decided, or I organically started an advocacy journey. I have spent a decade in the trenches helping those who follow in my footsteps to understand the system and the importance of strategy. My blog, onemomsbattle.com, has become a lifeline for people all around the world. We have 250,000 community members worldwide. So I've gone on to create the resources and the support that I wish I had during my own journey. As Senator Susan Rubio mentioned, I have been involved in legislative change, supporting bills around the country, such as Caden's Law, testifying at Senate hearings. And here in California, we worked very hard to bolster the efforts of Senator Susan Rubio and Ana Estevez to pass Pinky's Law by raising awareness and generating support. In 2020, I founded Family Court Awareness Month, and over the past few years, we have received over 300 proclamations from cities, counties, and states across the country declaring November as Family Court Awareness Month. I will leave you with this. There is a misconception about cases labeled high conflict. This label implies that 2 parties are in conflict, but that is rarely the case. It is typically a survivor fighting to protect children from an abuser. Domestic violence is about power and control. The abuser's need for control does not dissipate when the relationship ends. And many, including myself, discover that post-separation abuse is more painful than the abuse inflicted during the relationship. I want to express gratitude to the journalists who are here today, because over the past 14 years, I have seen a reluctance from journalists to cover family court stories. It's brushed off as a private family matter or a complex topic, but it's really not. It's quite simple. Post-separation abuse is an extension of domestic abuse, and the family court system becomes the abuser's playground. We're in a court system that lacks the basic training and understanding of domestic violence, and our children are being placed in grave danger. We have a crisis, and it's called family court. With November being Family Court Awareness Month, this is an opportune time for each of you to shine a spotlight on these issues. So thank you very much for having me here today. I think you're muted, Sanita. I see you talking, but I don't hear you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I wanted to ask you one question before we move on to Viji, and that is, you now have 250,000 people reading your blog and getting your advice from your blog. How did you manage to use social media and other sources to get this information out to 250,000 women? And I imagine this is across the country, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe across the world.
It's worldwide. Back when I started blogging in 2011, no one was talking about these issues. I couldn't find a single news article to save my life, to help to feel validated. And so when I titled it One Mom's Battle, I really did believe I was the only person. But turns out people from around the world have really flocked together. You know, originally it was because it was the only resource available. And now it's grown. We have private chapters. So we have a chapter for California. We have a chapter for Florida. Those are private groups on Facebook. And then we also have the bigger open social media platforms for people to learn and connect, and writing books. I've written 5 different books. Those have gained a lot of exposure on this topic. And so it has been organic, but it's been over a decade. So it has grown a lot.
Thank you. There are a few questions for you in the chat. If you could please address those, that would be terrific. Renee Barbie's question, Henrietta Burroughs' question, etc. Thank you again for joining us, Tina.
Absolutely. So did you want me to type chat into the
Yeah,
questions?
if you could
Perfect.
just
I will do. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And so now we move on to a familiar face for many of us, reporter Viji Sundaram, who over a 4-decade career has done some of the most insightful reporting on domestic violence. Viji will discuss California's new coercive control law. Welcome, Viji. Viji?
Yeah. Thank you, Sunita, and thank you, Sandy, for having me on this very important media briefing. I am usually not a very good public speaker, but when it comes to domestic violence, I don't know where I get the courage from. So what I want to talk about firstly, an incident that I experienced when I was a reporter with India West about 2 decades ago, or maybe not that long ago, but in any case, one gentleman one day walked into the newsroom. He said he was from Pakistan. He had heard about my activism, and would I please run a story about his daughter? And I said, what is the story about? And he said, she got married in an arranged marriage, which he arranged while she was in Pakistan. And the guy who came from him, he was from the US, originally of Pakistan descent. He told them that he was a software engineer making oodles of money. And so he would be able to provide her with a good, comfortable life. And this woman agreed. I'm going to use her name, first name. In fact, I wrote a story about her later. So he said, when she came here, she found out that he had a very low paying job in Silicon Valley, but what he was doing was he was making porn movies and making money out of that. And so within a few weeks after they got married, this woman, Mariam, noticed one woman after another trickling into the home, and he was making the movies in the home. And when one day he ran out of subjects, so he asked Mariam, will you participate in one of the movies? And she was shocked and she said no. And in any event, she was desperate to get out of the marriage because she couldn't take it anymore. She just felt it was wrong. Then she thought if she had a child, everything will be better. So she had a baby, a daughter. When the girl was about 2 years old, or even less, I'm not exactly sure, but he came to her once again. He came to his wife, Mariam, and said, you must participate in one of these movies, documentaries. And so she said, I'm not going to do it. And so he said, if you don't do it, I'm going to have our daughter do it. He's going to use her to make a porn movie. That was the last straw. And Mariam, when the husband was out of the house one day, she grabbed the child, grabbed the passport, grabbed whatever money she could lay her hands on, and fled the home and went to Chicago where her brother was. Her brother immediately called the husband and said, my sister's not coming back to your house. This cannot we cannot allow this to happen. She's leaving for Pakistan tonight. And the brother bought her a ticket and she went to Pakistan. And while there, she was in touch with the husband, not to ask him to take her back, but just to keep him posted about what was happening in her life. And he was very well aware that the wife and child were safe, but he chose to file a missing persons report. So Mariam immediately became a fugitive from justice. And for the next 3 years, she got herself a job with British Airways as a flight attendant. For the next 3 years, she was in constant fear that she would be arrested wherever she landed, whichever country she was in. Any case, then that is when the father came over to the office and said, could you run a story? And I said, I can't run it just on what you said. I need more documents. She said, yeah, the DA has got all the documents. The DA wants to arrest her. That's why she's now become a fugitive from justice. I will provide you all the documents. So first thing I did was, after reading the documents, I called up the husband and said, look, I want to come and talk to you. Are you willing to be interviewed? He first was shocked, quite, and then he said, sure, come to my house, I'll interview me. And I went there and I talked to him, and he pretended that he was desperately, he was very lonely and wanted the child back. In any case, what happened, I contacted Narika, the support group for battered women in the Bay Area. They hired an attorney who was so very nice. He said, I can do it for you for about $400, which is unheard of. No attorney will take on a case for this amount. Any case, to cut a long story short, Dan Mayfield, that was the name of the lawyer. I spoke to him even yesterday to make sure he remembers all this. And he said, I remember the case. I'm so glad we were able to help us. So he was able to prove from all the telephone bills that Mariam had been in constant touch with this guy. The DA did a shoddy job in keeping track. The DA could have easily found this out without us seeking an attorney. But so within a couple of months, Dan Mayfield was able to clear Mariam's name, and she was a free person. She could that thing about she was removed from the missing persons list, and right now she's remarried and quite happy. This is what she was going through clearly a case of coercive control, and she didn't know it because she wasn't beaten up by this guy, but just harassed to the point of, sometimes she considered ending her life, but she had a baby. So she, this is years ago, if only Senator Rubio's bill was there and she was aware of it, she could have probably sought relief through the courts or some other means instead of having to flee to Pakistan. But I think that is an amazing bill which Senator Rubio introduced. And she's also introduced other bills where coercive control is emphasized. But the sad part is not all judges know about the coercive control law. Even today, they are still, not believing women who come there, even though they come with evidence. The one judge said, "How can I believe you? You had a child with this guy," which is crazy for a judge to say that. So she lost custody. She didn't get what she wanted from court, but judges have to be educated. And that is why Senator Rubio's Picky's Law bill, which was just signed 3 weeks ago by the governor, will help if the judges are forced to, you can't force judges, but if the judges only decide to educate themselves on the nuances of domestic violence. Thank you. I'll take questions if you like.
Absolutely. Vijay, there are a number of questions for you, but I wanted to ask you, first of all, if you could give us a brief description of what coercive control is, and is California the only state to have such a law?
So coercive control widens the definition of domestic violence. Earlier, people thought coercive domestic violence was when the partner beat not necessarily the wife, one partner beat up the other, and that resulted in maybe a black eye or broken bones. But Rubio's bill redefined coercive control, expanded the definition, and right now, under her bill, coercive control can include financial abuse, emotional abuse, anything. It doesn't have to be. It can be, emotional abuse over a period of time. And the person does not have to come with documents to show that she had been physically abused. So that's what coercive control is.
Understood. And is California the only state to have such a law?
California was the second state in the nation after Hawaii to introduce the bill, a coercive control law. And now there are 5 states, I believe, which have passed such similar laws, Connecticut included. I think Connecticut had its bill shortly after California did. There are 5 states in the nation which have coercive control laws, and many states are now introducing their own bills.
Interesting. Henrietta has a very good question for you. Henrietta. She may not
No,
be on.
I finally,
oh, there you are.
I finally
Henrietta.
unmuted. Thanks so much. So, Vijay, how could you possibly have set up an interview to see this man by yourself, considering the business he was doing in his home? Did you tell people you were going to his house?
Yes, I did. I was terrified, actually. I thought about it many times. Should I be taking this risk? Because this guy had no limits to whom he was asking. He asked the mail woman one day if she would come in for a little while and do the documentary, and she could continue her job. So I did one. I told my friends, I'm going to this place. I gave them the address, and I said, in case I don't come back, come there. Yes, I was scared.
Thank you.
So Before I go to Tina and VG for their 1-minute sound bites, I would like Gloria Angeles to share her story, and then ask Elena to share live the comments that she made in the chat. So Gloria first. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of you. Give me a chance 1 minute to talk about my story. I mean, the domestic violence for me, it's since when I was born, because, you know, I am a woman. But now in the last few years, I sharing my life with a guy. I didn't even know until I was still living together that he has alcoholic problems. So I've been dealing with this for 2 years, and I'm trying to, you know, to put him out. But it's not like really easy, like somebody like my friends come in and say, oh, just put him out. It's not a way, because when we are in the violence circle, it's very hard to, you know, take off all these people from our life. So the violence in my case, it's has been escalated, like verbal abuse and psychological. So I called the police a few weeks ago because he started like aggressive to me. So when the police came, that's supposed to ask me first what happened, because me, I was the person. I called them. No, they went first to him, that asking him what happened. So then after he came and say, oh, that's fine, he can leave only one night and then he can come back tomorrow. And I say to myself, I didn't call you for that. That's Tina. I think Tina said we have to talk about that. These people, they have to have educated about, you know, because it's who those in charge of people's safety. So my story is very long about violence, but I experienced since when I was born, because in my family we are 6 sisters. So in Mexico, and I don't know if other culture I can talk about, but in Mexico, a culture that we're not doing anything in our life. That is from a small village, because I was born in the indigenous community in Oaxaca. So this is the way women's living there, and it is very hard to be away from all this violence. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to look for help, like therapy. I've been for 2 years. 2 years. So this is only I can share, because I know the time is it's finished. Thank you.
Gloria, thank you so much. And I wish you best of luck in getting the help you need. Thank you. Elena, could you please share live the comments that you made in the chat? Because I think those are very insightful.
Hi, everyone. I made several comments, so which one you wanted me to comment on?
Whatever you feel is relevant to this conversation, Elena.
Okay, thank you. First of all, really thankful for this topic, really important for all the communities. And the comment I want to speak about is that when we reporters cover domestic violence topic, we have to be careful towards domestic violence victim or survivor, but also very careful about naming or saying anything about the abuser, because the abusers, you know, the perpetrators, they can be really very inventive. It can be dangerous towards the victim and the reporters, and it can end up in a trial, a court trial. So what I want to say, just when trying to cover the story, just we all have to be really careful saying about domestic violence. It's really really very important thing. And another topic, and another thing I want to say about women, this is what I got to know from our Russian speaking community. Many women who are the victims, they really don't know what to do after they report domestic violence, literally, and they have to return to abuser because they don't know where to go, they don't know who to call to apply, etc., where to seek for help, and they return to abuser, and this circle of violence continues. So they need this information and instruction or education to know what to do. This is what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Tina and Vici, I want to return to you. I know we're running out of time, but I want to return to each of you for just your 30-second soundbite of what your most important takeaway from this briefing and what you'd like to share with reporters. Tina, let's go to you first.
Hello. Post-separation abuse is an extension of domestic violence, and the family court system has become the abuser's playground. This is a system that lacks basic training on domestic violence, and this should outrage everyone. It is a social justice crisis that belongs to all of us, but media is the avenue for us to raise awareness, which will lead to change. When we have women who are staying in abusive relationships because they are so afraid of the court system, we have a huge problem.
Thank you so much, Tina. Vici.
Yeah, in my reporting on domestic violence, I realized that women, in most litigants, low-income litigants who report domestic violence, who go to the court for remedies for domestic violence, represent themselves, 80% nationwide, represent themselves in court. So the court system is set up more for lawyers. They know how to navigate the system. Very few women know how to navigate the system. And especially if you have language problems, it's even worse. So I really and truly hope that Senator Rubio will continue filing bills, introducing bills that would improve the family courts and force judges to educate themselves on what domestic violence is all about.
To everyone who joined today, and especially to Vici and Tina, thank you so much. We'll see you next Friday.